Actress Shelley Duvall has passed away. Duvall died of complications from diabetes at her home in Texas. She was 75 years old. At 74, Shelley Duvall broke her silence about Stanley Kubrick. For 44 years she never told the full truth about The Shining. The 127 takes that made her hands bleed. The 12 hours of crying every day. The clumps of hair falling out from stress. Everyone knew it was brutal, but what Shelley revealed in her final interview was darker than anyone imagined. She talked about what happened between those takes. What Kubrick made her do when the camera stopped rolling. The secret that haunted her for decades is finally out. Shelley Duvall was born on July 7, 1949, in Fort Worth, Texas. She was the first child of Bobby Ruth Crawford, who worked in real estate, and Robert Richardson Duvall, who had once been a cattle auctioneer, but later became a lawyer. Her early years were full of constant moving from one Texas town to another. Her father's insurance job was unstable, so the family often lived in hotels, until they finally settled in Houston around 1954. Shelley was 5 when they found some stability, but life in their household was anything but quiet. She was the only girl with 3 younger brothers. Scott was born in 1955, Shane in 1957, and Stuart in 1959. That loud, chaotic energy shaped her bold personality. Her parents named her after the famous writer Mary Shelley. But there was nothing artistic in their careers. They eventually divorced in 1973, and her father died in 1994 at age 74. By 1960, Shelley had already watched her father shift from auctioning cattle to practicing law. This constant change gave her a deep resilience but also made her feel isolated. She didn't grow up around the arts, and the only time she stood on stage as a child during a 6th-grade talent show in 1961, she forgot the lines of a poem and ran off embarrassed. Strangely enough, by 17 in 1966, she was already modeling at Neiman Marcus, showing early signs of charm she didn't even know she had. By the time she was 10, around 1959, Shelley was already trying to make something of her own. She created a homemade lip gloss called the Pink Stuff, using petroleum jelly and food coloring, and sold it door-to-door in Houston for spare change. Her mother called her Manic Mouse back in 1955, not just for her wild energy but because she couldn't sit still, constantly knocking things over while racing through the house. At 12 in 1961, she was already reading Grimm's fairy tales and stories like The Wizard of Oz. Her bookshelf had over 20 books, and she made up her own stories too, long before anyone thought she'd one day produce fairy tale shows. That same year, the talent show Disaster left a mark. Parents in the crowd whispered that she'd never make it in entertainment. Still, in 1963, she joined the school choir, often biking around Houston with kites and headphones, listening to the strange, dreamy music of the 60s. She had no formal art training, but she was always sketching. At just 6 years old, she'd sit in the grass and draw insects, sometimes making over 50 detailed bug sketches in one go. By 1965, she dreamed of becoming a scientist, but even then, people didn't quite get her. She was the straightest student, yet daydreamed so much in class that classmates thought she was weird. When she graduated from Walrop High School on June 5, 1967, she still had no plans of being an actress. She enrolled at South Texas Junior College to study nutrition and diet therapy, hoping to become a scientist. Her dream crashed hard in 1968 when she watched a lab experiment where they cut into a monkey's brain while it was still alive. The horror of it made her leave college that very day. From 1967 to 1969, she paid her bills by selling scarves and perfumes at Foley's department store, making around $200 a month. Even before high school, she was excelling in science. At Frank Black Middle School between 1960 and 1963, she once scored 98% on a biology exam while doodling bugs in the margins. She'd been collecting insects since 1957, and by 1965 had gathered over 100 different specimens. But the monkey vivisection on October 15, 1968 ended all that. She said she felt like she was floating through life after that, drifting until something unexpected pulled her into a world she never planned for. Right after high school, when she was still just 17, Shelley married a photographer named Bernard Sampson on December 2, 1967. The wedding was small, just 50 guests. Her parents were surprised but eventually gave their blessing. They had met in 1966 during one of her short modeling gigs at Neiman Marcus. He was 25 when he took her picture and they quickly fell into a whirlwind romance. In 1970, she threw a party for him in Houston to show off his artwork. That night, someone on Robert Altman's film crew saw her. That moment changed her life forever. By 1972, she was filming Brewster Mloud, and the tension between her rising fame and her marriage was starting to show. Sampson didn't like how close she was getting to her co-stars. She was paid $5,000 for her first big acting role, more than what he was making. The marriage ended officially on March 15, 1974. Court papers were filed that January, citing irreconcilable differences. Shelley was heartbroken. Years later, in a 2012 interview, she said losing her first love at just 24 was one of the hardest things she ever faced. Her discovery by Robert Altman felt like something out of a movie. On April Fool's Day in 1970, she hosted that now famous party in Houston for Bernard's art, and Altman's crew was there scouting for a film. Altman himself was drawn in by her strange magnetic energy. He pretended to be interested in art just to get her to do a screen test. She didn't want to act. She said she wasn't an actress, but Altman saw something rare. He cast her as Suzanne Davis in Brewster Mloud, where she played a quirky tour guide inside the Houston Astrodome. The movie came out on December 5, 1970. It flopped at first but later became a cult classic. Shelley flew around the country doing press for it. She appeared in Vogue and Show magazine. It was her first time leaving Texas. Altman would later admit he didn't realize she wasn't acting. He thought her unique personality was a performance, but he also called her magic. The next year she was cast in McCabe and Mrs. Miller, playing a mail-order bride named Ida Coyle. The film was shot in a freezing, muddy Canadian mining town. Released on June 24, 1971, the movie was dark, raw, and different. It made $8.22 million from just a $2 million budget. Shelley played a woman whose husband dies, leaving her to survive alone in a rough place where women were often sold like property. Her character was bought for $1,500. The role showed a different side of her. She wasn't just quirky anymore. She could do serious drama. Critics noticed how well her face fit into the time period. Even though she was so modern in real life, she hadn't even auditioned formally. Altman cast her based on instinct. In 1974, while filming Thieves Like Us in Mississippi, Shelley had to film a scene where she almost drowns. She played Kitschy, a young woman in love with a criminal. The director made her do the river scene over and over, and the water was full of insects and dirt. She was only 24, but it wore her out completely. Co-star Keith Carradine said she had an enchanting aura, but the truth was she left the set exhausted. The film came out on February 11, 1974, and while it didn't make huge money, critics loved her performance.